Tak and the Power of Juju is a weird game. If you don't know anything about Tak and the Power of Juju, it is a game that was released in 2003 and tells the story of a young apprentice named Tak who is tasked with fulfilling the Moon Juju prophecy to bring peace to the Papa Nunu people who have been turned into sheep by an evil shaman. And today, we're going to be speedrunning it. Being a 3D platformer developed in the early 2000s, this game has a lot of bugs, and I mean a lot. The top speedruns for this game abuse this dozens of times throughout the game, and I'm really surprised this game isn't more competitive. The jumps and clips are very unforgiving, the routes are very specific, and it can take a ton of time if you miss one thing, and I can see this being a game that takes years to perfect. The game starts off with Tak going through training under his master Jabulba. At the very first jump in the game, we already have an opportunity to skip a cutscene. All we have to do is jump onto this ledge and fall off to the left to clip through the fence, and then there's a big skip that can be done before hopping onto this rhino that would allow us to skip the rest of the tutorial, but I wasn't able to pull it off. This skip is crucial for any top speedrun because the rest of the tutorial is fairly long. Each new training spot has its own cutscene and instruction on how the game works. We learn that we can ride a rhino to bust down walls, throw fruit to hit things such as monkeys who get angry and attack the nearest thing, and then orangutans that can fling us into different areas by launching us into a tree, and then rams that will knock us away if we stand on their turf. After completing the tutorial, we're told that one of Jabulba's apprentices, Locke, has been turned into a sheep, and we have to go find some magical plants in order to change him back. So now all we have to do is collect 9 plants in order to turn Locke back into a human so that he can go fight the evil shaman. On our journey to find the first plant, we find another situation where we have to go against the game's intentions. The root of this tree doesn't actually meet at a point, but it meets at a small shelf so that we can jump on top of it. Using this shelf, we can jump over a wall that we normally could not get past just yet, allowing us to go to Dry Rock Canyon to get our plants. Once at Dry Rock Canyon, our main goal is to get 3 plants and then to get out of there. The plants that we have to kill aren't too difficult, they throw bombs at us that we have to dodge, and eventually will taunt us, which is when we can attack it. The plant also swings a vine around after the first hit that we'll have to make sure to dodge when it's attacking. After hitting the plant 3 times, we get our first magical plant. After traversing through the canyon for a bit, we find our second plant, which works out just the same as the first, and we get our second plant piece. The third plant is on a pretty small battlefield, making it a bit harder to navigate, but it still isn't too much of an issue, and now we have all the plant pieces we need from this place, and all that's left is for us to get out. We could just run all the way back to where we came from in order to get back home, but instead there is a wall that we can clip through that takes us right back to the start. Once back in the village, we're on to the next spot to get more plants. This spot is the burial ground, which is supposed to be the first place to go to in the game, but we avoided it by jumping along that tree route. Once in the burial ground, the intended route from the game is to collect golden teeth in order to open up the tomb in order to get our staff, but there's a skip that we can pull off to avoid having to do all of that. In this game, there's a standard double jump, just like many other platformers, but there's also a roll that Tak can perform. If timed right, we can roll, and while rolling, we can perform a double jump, and this maneuver is referred to as a triple jump, and is something that we can do to grab onto this ledge and to get the staff through the back way. This jump is pretty hard to pull off, but it's definitely worth getting good at due to the huge amount of time it can save. After jumping to this ledge, we have to first find our way to a couple of plants, which we can take care of pretty handily, and then we get to go unlock our staff. Unlocking the staff gives us a few new tricks that we get to have at our disposal. The first important part of the staff is that we now can staff jump, which allows us to jump higher than either double jumping or triple jumping, and the other thing about the staff is that later on in the game we'll be able to use it as a blowgun to shoot enemies. After dealing with a cutscene that is way too long, we get our staff and venture our way to the last plant that we have to kill within the burial grounds. And after completing the burial grounds, we have one last place to go to get some more plant pieces. After returning to Tak's village, we make our play to the last place, the Lower Tree Village. Once in the Lower Tree Village, we find some of our old village friends that have been turned into sheep, and by attacking one of the sheep on the treadmill, it will run and open up the door for us to go into the main area. After leaving the main area, we find an orangutan who happily takes our sheep and launches it onto a different treetop. Following along with the sheep, we open up the next door to unlock the acorns that we can use to shoot enemies out of our staff. After shooting the sheep above the door, we move outside to encounter our first puzzle of the game. Our goal is to get the orangutan to move over to the other tree to launch us to the first plant. By shooting the monkey in the tree, it'll get angry and attack the orangutan, causing it to fight back, and then it'll end up moving over to the different launch tree. After we launch to the first plant, we quickly take it out and then move on to the second one. There's a trick here where if we get close enough to the edge of the second plant area before we fall off, it'll respawn us at the plant. And after getting the respawn trick, we got our 8th plant piece. Now we just have to do one other orangutan puzzle, launch ourselves up and get the last plant of the area, and then all we have to do is get back home. We grab another sheep and take it to the treadmill to open up the gate for us to return to Tak's village. Once returning to Tak's village, we take the plants back to our master Jabulba only to find out that the sheep that we thought was his apprentice Locke was instead his squire Tobar. Since the plants didn't work out, Jabulba tells us our next mission is to go get the Spirit Rattle, which will allow us to communicate with powerful Juju spirits to help us figure out where Locke is. In order to get the Spirit Rattle, we have to defeat Pins and Needles. In the fight with Pins and Needles, they throw magic balls at us that inflate our head, and if inflated too much, it will explode. After popping both Pins and Needles' heads, we are given the Spirit Rattle, which dishes out higher damage than the staff. After returning the rattle, we find out that Locke has been trampled to death by a herd of sheep, and the only way to bring Locke back to life is to collect his spirit from the spirit world, as well as 100 magic Yorbles. The next part of this speedrun is to collect all 100 Yorbles as well as 3 Moonstones, which we will need later on. In this game, there are 200 total Yorbles to collect, but the best route is pretty optimal, and also pretty punishing if you miss a couple of Yorbles along the route. In Tack's Village, we collect 3 Yorbles, do the tree root jump again, and then collect the Dinky Juju, which we will need later. After that, we collect the Mana Magnet, which will help us keep our mana up once we get the Crazy Feet power up. We then use the Dinky Juju on the shrine, collecting the board for the sandboarding, and then we head to Numa Dunes. In Numa Dunes, there are 3 Yorbles that we want to collect. One is straight ahead after the first big jump, one is on the very right side of the mountain that we have to get a big jump in the air to grab, and then the last one is on the very left that we have to get a jump into the cavern to get. The last thing we need in Numa Dunes is the Crazy Feet power-up. This power-up is probably the most important power-up for the speedrun due to the fact that it allows us to sprint much faster, saving us a ton of time for the rest of the run. After leaving Numa Dunes, it's time to backtrack to the Lower Tree Village to grab some Yorbles. Once in the Lower Tree Village, we make our way to a set of zip lines that have 3 Yorbles in total. There's a trick in this speedrun called the Thomas that gets all 3 Yorbles in one try, but that's way too advanced for me, so we're just going to grab them one at a time. The next Yorble is inside of this Nurble nest that we have to destroy to get. We then grab one that is hanging below a zip line, get one that's above the doorway in the big tree, and then we head up to the Upper Tree Village to get a bunch more. Once in the Upper Tree Village, we hit the sheep to get outside, and then we get our friendly orangutan to launch us up to grab a Yorble on the ledge, and then get one by ziplining down the vine. We get the sheep on the treadmill to give us a ride on the lift to another one on a mushroom, staff jump over the fence for another, find one on the edge of a cliff, slide down a zipline for one, grab one on a rope swing, grab another one on a different rope swing, and then break open a Nurble nest for another. At this point, we're scooping up all the Yorbles fairly easily, but now it's time for the puzzle room. This puzzle room requires us to maneuver some sheep and orangutans around in order for us to get launched on all the different platforms that have all the Yorbles, but there's a pretty powerful glitch in this game called item storage and hover jumping that we can do instead. Up until this point, I didn't want to spend the time to learn it, but I figured it would be worth doing it, seeing how good it was and how often it was used. Essentially, to perform this trick, all we have to do is jump and land on a throwable item, and to press the button to drop the item at the exact same time we pick it up. Once pulling that off, we're now in a state called item storage where the game thinks that we're holding an item, but it also doesn't have an item in our hand. Now that we have this state, if we press jump and throw on the exact same frame, and for only one frame, it will propel us upward. So in order to get high up on these ledges, we have to perform frame-perfect presses consecutively to continue jumping. I never got too great at this technique, but I could pull it off enough just to get the job done, and once figuring out well enough, I collected all of the Yorbles in the puzzle room and went on to finish the Upper Tree Village by grabbing the Yorble out on the nest and then one on the rope swing. In order to leave Upper Tree Village, we needed to do either another hover jump, which I lost item storage to do, or we have to use this lamp and staff to jump over the gate. I was then onto the mountain to grab 11 more Yorbles. Once in the mountaintop, there's a fence where we have to once again perform another nearly perfect jump in order to skip past. This jump requires us to corner ourselves in the wall, roll directly backwards, and then to crazy feet into a staff jump so that we land ourselves perfectly on this ledge. After jumping the fence, we quickly grab 5 Yorbles, with some being harder to grab than others, such as this one on the ledge of the water, and also this one being guarded by some rams, and then we jump back over to where we came from. We grab one next to the giant Nurble, ride a rhino to get one on top of a mushroom, grab a couple more with the rhino, and then we head back to Tack's Village. We then have to make our way back to Dry Rock to pick up some Yorbles, and then we perform another wall clip that takes us into the caverns. The caverns are a pretty scary place, and the way that we have to do this is we have to follow a light while running through, and if we lose the light, we'll die from the darkness. In the caverns, there are 15 total Yorbles in the first 2 of the 3 caverns, but I was a bit behind in the amount that I was supposed to have at this point in the run, so after running through and grabbing all of the ones from the first 2 caverns, I ran through the 3rd one to get myself some extra Yorbles, just in case I missed a couple during the rest of the run. After leaving the caverns, we head to the entrance of the Sun Temple, which we'll have to do a wall clip on our way to the entrance, and then we have to do yet another one to get inside of the temple. This wall clip is pretty precise and requires us to grab onto the ledge at a pretty specific angle, grapple up, and then jump into the wall to the right, and then once in the wall, we have to walk along this thin path that takes us into the loading zone for the Sun Temple. The Sun Temple is a pretty big puzzle room with a boss fight at the end where we get our Moonstones. The first part of the temple, we have to jump down some floating platforms, kill a couple of nurbles, activate a timer that drops a platform, and work our way to that platform before the timer runs out. Once the platform takes us up to the top, we're on to the next room. The next room requires us to defeat multiple waves of enemies, working our way from one side of the room to the other in order to open up different doors. After defeating the waves of enemies, we make our way to the next room and grab ourselves a couple of Yorbles along the way. This room is pretty simple, we just have to jump our way along the platforms and we grab another Yorble hiding off to the left. The next room requires us to kill every large nurble in the room before the door opens, followed by a similar room which we grab another Yorble off to the left, and then take out the big nurbles blocking the doorway. The next room is a pretty tricky one that spits us back at the beginning if we fail. We have to kill off some big nurbles that give us some more platforms to jump onto, all while avoiding these bomb guys that will knock us off the edge if we get too close. This leads us into the last room of the temple before the boss fight. This room is on a timer and all we have to do is kill off every enemy in the room, which will then allow us to carry on to the boss fight. The boss fight of the Sun Temple is once again against pins and needles, except this time we're riding on chickens, shooting different magical spells at each other. There are 3 total waves of the boss fight, starting out with 2 1v1s and ending with a 2v1 against both pins and needles. During the fight, there are 4 different types of missiles that we can grab. The yellow one is a basic aim and shoot, the green one arches towards the enemy, the red one shoots out in bursts of 3, and the blue one will shoot a frost shot. This fight isn't too hard, and once completing the 2v1, the fight is over and we are given our first moonstone. The most important thing in this run is to make sure not to grab the moonstone just yet, because in this game 3 moonstones are required in order to get to the final boss, and since it takes a long time to get all 3 moonstones, there's a way to duplicate these. The way to duplicate the moonstone is to jump on top of the moonstone and to pause the game just as Tack is landing on the ground. After that, we have to save the game, quit, and then reload from the last save. Essentially what happens is the moonstone is added to our inventory before the moonstone is removed from the ground, so if we save the game after it is added to our inventory but before it is removed from the ground, we can restart our game and the moonstone will still be on the ground, allowing us to continue to grab them. We just have to repeat this step one more time, and then on the final time we just grab the moonstone like we normally would, and then we have 3 in total. After leaving the Sun Temple, there are just a few more Yorbles for us to grab in Dry Rock before heading back to Tack's village. Once back in Tack's village, we head back to the burial grounds, and from there, there's another clip that we have to do in order to get to the mummy tombs without dealing with a long cutscene. Once in the mummy tombs, we're now tasked with rescuing 4 individual mummies in order to open up the portal to the spirit world to go get Locke. This part of the game is basically just a very large escort mission, with our escorts being very slow and brain-dead mummies. We head to the main tomb to open up the first crypt, and each of the 4 mummy crypts have a theme for how the booby traps are set up. The first crypt is all about floating platforms that we have to navigate across and not fall off of, and then near the end of the crypt there are a couple of Yorbles that we grab, and then we make it to the end of the crypt. At the end of the crypt we wake up the mummy, and then we use this seesaw to launch the mummy over the ledge since the mummy cannot jump. We then walk the mummy past the first 2 platforms, and then at the final platform at the entrance, we have to knock the mummy out so that they can pass underneath the bridge, and then escort him back to the main tomb. After returning the first mummy, we move on to the second crypt. The theme for the second crypt is fire. There are different rooms that we have to navigate and jump across without getting burned, and there are 2 Yorbles in this crypt that we need to grab along the way before we get to the end. Once at the end, we wake up the mummy and launch him over the ledge like before, and the mummy will not die by walking over the fire, so we must position ourselves on the opposite side of the burning bridges so that the mummy walks right across them. The script is pretty easy and only requires us to activate a couple of switches and navigate a couple of windy paths in order to get the mummy out safely. After getting the second mummy to the tomb, we move on to the third one. This theme is arrow traps. By stepping on any of these pressure plates, the arrow traps will go off, requiring us to dodge them or to lose some health. There are 3 Yorbles in this crypt that we have to grab before getting to the mummy, and just like the fire crypt, the mummy can be shot by the arrows and be perfectly fine. All we have to do after grabbing the mummy is we just navigate back out of the crypt in the same way we came in, making sure that the mummy isn't walking off any edges, and then it's on to the last crypt. The last crypt is pretty unique in the fact that the mummy will lose his head when it's hit, and it will run around in the direction of its head instead of running towards us. After grabbing the mummy, there's a glitch where we can place its head on the upper path and then boost it up by jumping underneath it to avoid going the long way around. Other than that one trick, there are a few Yorbles that we have to grab with the help of the mummy, and then we just help the mummy out of the crypt by carrying its head around. After placing all 4 of the mummies in the main tomb, the portal for the spirit world opens up, and we're ready to go retrieve our dear friend Locke. In the spirit world, we have to break red vases that allow us to enter spirit mode, that allows us to see and use parts of the world that we cannot see outside of spirit mode. We grab the first Yorble to the right, and then we enter the spirit mode. Once in spirit mode, we cross the bridge and then break 2 more vases, opening up another spirit portal. We go into spirit mode once again, cross the bridge, and break another vase. We then grab another Yorble and launch ourselves over to the next island with the orangutan. We collect another Yorble, and then we're tasked with collecting balloons for one of the Juju's birthday parties. There's a pretty tough skip at this part in the run that skips the need to collect all 3 balloons that saves a huge amount of time. All we have to do is jump up and grab the first balloon, and then we run past the birthday boy and jump up on this high ledge. From here we jump off at just the right moment and fly all the way over to the following island. This is a pretty hard jump and it took me a couple of tries to do it, but overall still saved me a lot of time compared to having to collect all the balloons. Once landing on the other side, we collect the Yorble at the landing spot, break some more vases, and then grab another Yorble. After doing this a couple more times, we eventually cross the Spirit Bridge, making our way to the Spirit World boss. All we have to do for the Spirit World boss is to defeat these 3 large Nurbles, unlocking the towers that lead to Lock's spirit. We climb up the towers and reach our dear friend Lock, who's stuck inside a balloon. From here there is a hedge maze with spikes and a bunch of wind that we are expected to precariously navigate through without popping Lock's balloon, but there's a skip that we can do to run along the top of the maze, skipping nearly the entire thing. Once reaching the end of the Spirit World, we travel back to Tack's village and turn in the Moonstones, 100 Yorbles, and Lock's spirit. After resurrecting Lock, the Moon Juju reveals that the Warrior of the Prophecy is not Lock, but instead Tack, basically making all the work that we did worthless, and we are sent in to defeat the final boss, Tallock. The final fight against Tallock is pretty difficult. First we have to destroy 6 of his plants, which he then turns us into a chicken, and then using the chicken we run through a small path with holes and spikes, bringing us to the next platform. This platform requires us to destroy the plants by shooting them with our staff, and once destroying all of those we are turned into a rhino, which we then have to cross another thin path with holes to get to the next platform. This next platform we just get Tallock to shoot missiles towards us, which we then dodge at the last second, making him destroy the shields on his own plants. After destroying all of his plants on the 3rd platform, we must launch ourselves into the giant plant, giving us the power to turn Tallock into a sheep. Once turning Tallock into a sheep, we fling him into the large plant, which ends our timer. And that's the story of Tack and the Power of Juju. It's quite the odd story, but it's also quite a difficult speedrun. There are many different clips and tricks that you have to learn, and it's a pretty extensive route that must be memorized, so if you're looking for a new game to speedrun, I definitely recommend giving this one a shot. It is a difficult yet very fun speedrun to do. Let me know what game you want to see me speedrun next. I'm speedrunning every single game ever made for the GameCube, so make sure to subscribe to see every game get speedrun.